The Navy SEAL who discovered fear was just an illusion. A decorated Navy SEAL with 15 years of combat experience, 3 Purple Hearts, and 0 fear in the battlefield was taught the deepest secret about conquering fear by a 70-year-old Buddhist monk who had never left his monastery in Montana. What this monk revealed will completely change how you understand fear forever. If you've ever felt paralyzed by anxiety, overwhelmed by uncertainty, or trapped by your own thoughts, this story will show you exactly how to break free using ancient wisdom that's helped millions of people for over 2,500 years. Meet David Martinez. For 15 years, he was the guy other Navy SEALs looked up to. He'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, led dozens of high-risk missions, and earned a reputation as someone who literally didn't know what fear was. When bullets were flying, when everything was chaos, David was the calm center that everyone relied on. But when David returned home in 2019, everything fell apart. Within 6 months, his wife Sarah filed for divorce. She said, "You came back, but you never really came home. You're always somewhere else, always on guard, always angry." His 16-year-old daughter Emma stopped talking to him entirely. She told her mom, "Dad scares me. He's not the person who left." David couldn't sleep without nightmares. He'd wake up in combat mode, thinking he was back in Afghanistan. He couldn't drive without panic attacks. Every car backfiring sounded like an IED. He couldn't go to a grocery store without analyzing every person as a potential threat. The man who had faced enemy fire without flinching was now terrified of his own shadow. He tried therapy. He tried medication. He tried alcohol. Nothing worked. The fear wasn't just in his mind anymore. It had taken over his entire life. He couldn't function. He couldn't work. He couldn't be around people. After his 3rd suicide attempt, his VA therapist, Dr. Jennifer Park, gave him one last option. There's a Buddhist monastery in Montana. They specialize in helping veterans with PTSD using meditation and ancient Buddhist principles. David laughed bitterly. "Look, Doc, I've spent 15 years learning how to kill people. What could some peaceful monks possibly teach me about fear?" Dr. Park looked him in the eye and said, "David, what you've been fighting isn't the enemy. It's yourself, and you're losing." 3 weeks later, David found himself at Terra Monastery, 8,000 feet up in the Montana mountains. No cell service, no distractions, just silence and snow-capped peaks. On his first morning, he met Master Chen, a gentle 70-year-old monk who had spent 50 years in meditation. David sized him up immediately. 5'6", maybe 140 pounds, soft hands that had never held a weapon. During their first conversation, David exploded. "Look, no disrespect, but you've lived in a bubble your whole life. You've never faced real danger. You don't know what fear is. You can't possibly understand what I've been through." Master Chen smiled peacefully and said something that stopped David cold. "You're absolutely right, David. I've never faced bullets. I've never been in combat. But I have faced something far more terrifying." David scoffed back. "What could possibly be more terrifying than war?" Master Chen replied, "My own mind. For 30 years, I was completely paralyzed by fear. I was afraid of failing, afraid of dying, afraid of living. I was afraid of disappointing people, afraid of being alone, afraid of making mistakes. I was even afraid of being afraid. You fought external enemies that you could see, shoot, and defeat. I fought an enemy within that seemed impossible to conquer. David was quiet for the first time in months. Master Chen continued, "You see, David, there are two types of courage. The courage to face external danger, which you have in abundance, and the courage to face your own mind. For most of my life, I was a coward in the second type." That night, David couldn't sleep, but for the first time in years, it wasn't because of nightmares. It was because something the monk said had cracked open a truth he'd never considered. Maybe his real enemy wasn't the Taliban. Maybe it was his own mind creating stories of danger that didn't actually exist. Over the next 2 weeks, Master Chen taught David 6 life-changing principles that had freed him from 30 years of mental torture. First, understanding impermanence. David, you believe your fear is permanent, that this is just who you are now. But Buddha taught that everything is temporary, including fear. Your panic attacks come and go like clouds in the sky. The sky itself, your true self, remains unchanged. Second, seeing fear as illusion. Most of your fear isn't based on present reality. It's your mind creating stories about what might happen. When you're driving and hear a car backfire, your mind instantly creates a story. IED, danger. But there is no IED. There is no danger. There's just a sound and a story your mind attached to it. Third, practicing mindfulness. Instead of being lost in fear, learn to observe it. When panic rises, don't fight it or run away from it. Simply notice, here is fear visiting me again. You are not the fear. You are the awareness watching the fear. Fourth, understanding suffering. Your suffering isn't unique, David. It's part of the human experience. Every person who has ever lived has faced fear, loss, and uncertainty. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're human. Fifth, releasing attachment. You're attached to the idea that you should never feel fear because you're a Navy SEAL. You're attached to controlling every outcome. But attachment to outcomes is what creates suffering. Do your best, then let go of the results. Something incredible happened over the following months. David learned to sit with his panic attacks instead of fighting them. He learned to observe his nightmares like movies on a screen, present but not permanent. He learned to respond to uncertainty with curiosity instead of fear. When his mind created stories about danger, he learned to ask, is this actually happening right now? Or is this just a story? Most importantly, he learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's understanding that fear is just a thought, and thoughts are just mental events that come and go. 6 months later, David called his daughter Emma. For the first time in 2 years, they had a real conversation. She said, "Dad, you sound like you again." He reconciled with his ex-wife Sarah, not romantically, but as co-parents who could finally communicate without anger or fear. David became a peer counselor at the VA, helping other veterans using these same Buddhist principles. He discovered that his real mission wasn't fighting overseas, it was helping warriors fight the battle within. Today, David runs weekend retreats where combat veterans learn 2,500-year-old wisdom about conquering fear. His motto, "The bravest warriors are those who have the courage to face their own minds." Last month, I asked David what he would tell his younger self, the one who thought fear was weakness. He said, "Fear isn't your enemy. Fear is just a messenger trying to protect you. The problem isn't feeling fear, it's believing that fear is reality. Once you understand that fear is just a thought, and thoughts are just mental events that come and go, you're free."
Master Chen, now 72, still teaches at the monastery. When I asked him about David, he smiled and said, "David thought I taught him about fear, but actually, he taught me about courage. True courage isn't fearlessness. It's feeling fear and choosing love anyway." If this story has touched something in you, if you're ready to transform your relationship with fear using these ancient Buddhist principles, hit that subscribe button. These teachings have helped millions of people for thousands of years, and they can help you too. Comment "fearless" if you're ready to stop letting fear control your life and start living with the courage you were born with. And remember, you are not your thoughts. You are not your fears. You are the awareness that observes them. And that awareness, that is unshakable, unbreakable, and always free. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.